Welcome back again. In our previous lecture, we went pretty deep into learning about the various project management methodologies used in the visual media industry. And to be clear, those methods don't exclusively apply to the visual media industry. These methods are used across all industries. Sure, Agile is generally more applicable for teams with high rates of change, much like a design or development team. And waterfall is generally more appropriate for projects where teams repeat processes somewhat frequently, like a manufacturing process. I think you get the picture there. So in today's lecture, we're going to continue building upon that knowledge base by gaining an understanding for the project management lifecycle. Now, every project has similar phases, and they may vary slightly from one methodology to another. So we'll take a look at those first, and then we'll jump into the life cycles for each of the individual segments that we discussed in the previous lecture, except change management, and here's why. Number one, change management is not actually rooted in project management. Number two, I think it's good that you be exposed to what change management is, which is why we covered it in the previous lecture. But change management really falls into its own much larger bucket of processes that frankly really falls outside of our purview. And you may never need to use change management unless you really go into managing a team. And then number three, every single company has their own methods, or sometimes lack thereof, for change management. That tends to deviate from what is standard in the academic sphere. So it makes it a little bit hard to learn change management outside of the organizations you all will ultimately go off and work at. And it's difficult because you really lack the specific context surrounding a project or rollout of something in light of specific global or local events which change throughout the semester. So it's really hard to replicate an environment for that. Moving on from that, what we will cover in today's lecture will be project phases, project life cycles, agile life cycles, sequential life cycles, hybrid life cycles, and lastly, project life cycle selection, which is going to be really important for your lab. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to explain the key strategies of project management life cycles and their purposes, differentiate between agile, sequential, and hybrid life cycles based on their characteristics and applications, apply knowledge of project life cycles to determine the best approach for specific project scenarios, analyze how hybrid life cycles can integrate agile and sequential and process-based methodologies to meet project needs, and then evaluate factors influencing the selection of project management life cycles. All right, jumping in. Starting off with the different types or phases of a project. Regardless of what kind of project you're planning, they all go through the same stages, believe it or not. Let's take a look at this definition of a project once again. We originally looked at this in our first lecture for Module 2. You may recall that I put particular emphasis on the fact that a project is temporary. Sometimes projects go on for so long that it may not feel like they are temporary, but the important thing is that anything temporary has a beginning, middle, and an end. Although each project will require its own set of unique tasks and many times its own unique phase names and definitions, they all follow a similar framework. There's always a beginning, there is always a middle, and there is always an end. This is called the project management lifecycle. And effective project management requires a very thorough understanding of this life cycle, which on the surface does not look all that complex. However, each stage has individual challenges, deliverables, and stakeholders, and the project manager must be quick on their toes at navigating each one to ensure that the project's and ultimately the team's success who is working on that project. Now, Obviously, projects get a bit more complex than simply having a beginning, middle, and an end. So we often break it down in just a little bit further with 5 distinct phases: initiation, planning, execution, controlling, and monitoring, and then also project closure. And just to make this even more clear, here you go. Hopefully that clears things up. So let's get into each of these just a little bit deeper. The initiation phase is the first phase of the entire project management lifecycle, and the goal of this phase is to define the project. You'll also develop a business case for it and hopefully get it approved. During this time, the project manager may do any of the following: perform a feasibility study, create a project charter, identify key stakeholders, select project management tools. And by the end of this phase, the project manager should have a really high-level understanding of the project's purpose, goals, requirements, and risks. The planning phase is critical to creating a project roadmap for the entire team and that the team can really follow. This is where all of the details and goals are outlined in order to meet the requirements laid out by the organization. And during this phase, project managers will typically create a project plan, develop a resource plan, define goals and performance measures, communicate roles and responsibilities to the team members, build out workflows, and anticipate risks and create contingency plans. The next phase, execution, typically begins with a project kickoff call or a project kickoff meeting where the project manager outlines the project objectives to all stakeholders who are involved. However, before that meeting happens, it is crucial for the project manager to do each of the following: establish goals and deliverables, identify your team members and assign tasks, develop a draft project plan, define which metrics will be used to measure project success, identify and prepare for potential roadblocks, establish logistics and schedules for team communication, choose your preferred project management methodology, ensure your team has access and knowledge of the relevant tools that they will need throughout the project, and then schedule the project kickoff meeting, that's important, and set the agenda and prepare the presentation for the project kickoff meeting. This stage is where the bulk of the project really happens. Deliverables are built to make sure the project is meeting requirements, and this is where most of the time, money and people are pulled into the project. As previously mentioned, a kickoff meeting is held to sort of mark the official start of the execution phase. A kickoff meeting agenda might look something like introductions. Who's who? Maybe a background about the project. Why are you doing this project? What are the goals of the project? You might also talk about the project scope. What kind of work is involved in completing this project? What's the plan? What does the roadmap look like? Who will be responsible for which elements of the project? And what kind of communication channels will be used during the project? What kind of meetings or status reports should your team expect? Which tools will be used to complete the project, and how will they be used? And what are the immediate action items that need to be completed after the kickoff call? You might also open up the floor for a Q&A just to get any questions answered. This phase happens in tandem with the execution phase, controlling and monitoring. As the project moves forward, the project manager must make sure that all moving parts are seamlessly headed in the right direction. If adjustments to the project plan need to be made due to unforeseen circumstances or a change in direction, this is where they typically happen. During the controlling and monitoring phase, project managers may have to do any of the following: manage resources, monitor project performance, risk management, status meetings and report updates, and then update project schedule, and maybe even modify the project plans. And at the end of this phase, all the agreed project deliverables should hopefully be completed and accepted by the customer. And then finally, the closing phase is a really critical step in the project management lifecycle. It signals the official end of the project and provides a period for reflection, wrap up, and organization of materials that might be strewn about. And project managers can take inventory of all of those deliverables, tie up any loose ends, hand the project off to the client or the team that will be managing the project's day-to-day operations from this point forward, and then also perform something that's called a post-mortem. Sometimes you might also hear those called retros, which is short for retrospective. And these are really just to discuss and document any learnings from the project. You can also organize all project documents in a more centralized location. This is a great opportunity to communicate the success of the project to stakeholders and executives, and then celebrate the completion of the project and acknowledge the team members that worked on it. Now, remember at the beginning when I said that we were going to sort of abandon change management methodologies going forward? This is where that becomes relevant. This chart summarizes the characteristics of the 4 lifecycle categories that we're going to be covering in this class. I'll give you a moment to jot these down. It is important to note that all projects have these characteristics. No project is completely devoid of considerations around requirements, delivery, activities, and goals. A project's inherent characteristics determine which life cycle is the best fit for that project. So another way to understand how project life cycles vary is by using a continuum that ranges from sequential cycles on one end to agile cycles on the other end, with more process-based or change management cycles in the middle. Here's an example of where the continuum is displayed as a flat surface called a radar chart. This view emphasizes the shifting of project characteristics from one end to the other. Another way to visualize the continuum is with a two-dimensional square, also known as a matrix, shown here. No life cycle can be perfect for all projects. Instead, each project finds a spot on the continuum that provides an optimal balance of characteristics for its context. Specifically, agile life cycles. When teams use agile approaches, they iterate over the product to create finished deliverables. The team gains really early feedback and provides customer visibility, confidence, and control of the product. And because the team can release a lot earlier, the product may provide an earlier return on investment because the team delivers the highest value work first. Sequential life cycles take advantage of things that are known and proven. This reduced uncertainty and complexity allows teams to segment work into a sequence of predictable groupings. And then hybrid life cycles allows feedback on unfinished work to improve and modify that work in a predictable yet still somewhat flexible manner. Something important to note. Planning will always be there. This is a key thing to remember about life cycles, is that each of them share the same element of planning. What differentiates a life cycle is not whether planning is done, but rather how much planning is done and when it is done. In agile projects, the key difference is that the team plans and replans as more information becomes available from review of frequent deliverables. Regardless of the project lifecycle, the project requires planning. In contrast, at the sequential end of the continuum, the plan drives the work. As much planning as possible is performed up front. Requirements are identified in as much detail as possible. The team estimates when they can deliver which deliverables and performs comprehensive procurement activities at those times. And then in hybrid approaches, the two, agile and sequential, are really just blended. And prototypes and proofs are also planned. But the outputs are intended to modify the plans created in the beginning, and earlier reviews of unfinished work help inform future project work. Meanwhile, Process-based initiatives plan to deliver successive subsets of the overall project, and teams may plan several successive deliveries in advance or only one at a time. The deliverables really inform the future project work in this example, which is why it's called process-based. All right, let's go deeper into each of these life cycles, starting with Agile. In an Agile environment, the team expects requirements to change. The iterative and incremental approaches provide feedback to better plan the next part of the project. However, in Agile projects, incremental delivery often uncovers hidden or perhaps even misunderstood requirements. The image here provides two possible ways to achieve incremental delivery. So the project aligns with customer needs and can be adapted as necessary. In iteration-based Agile, the team works in iterations or time boxes of equal duration to deliver completed features. The team works on the most important tasks, collaborating as a team to finish it. Then the team works on the next most important task and finishes it. And the team may decide to work on a small handful of tasks at a time, but the team does not address all of the work for the iteration at once. In other words, it really doesn't address all of the requirements followed by all of the analyses, etc. In flow-based Agile, the team pulls tasks from a task backlog based on the team's capacity to start work, rather than working on a specific schedule or priority order, like in a more iteration-based Agile cycle. The team really defines its workflow with columns on a task board and manages the work in progress for each column. Another way to look at this is actually it's a Kanban board. Each task may take a different amount of time to finish, and teams keep work in progress sizes much, much smaller to better identify issues early and reduce rework should changes be required. Without iterations to define planning and review points, the team and business stakeholders determine the most appropriate schedule for planning, product reviews, and retrospectives. Agile life cycles are those that fulfill the principles of the Agile Manifesto. In particular, customer satisfaction increases with early and continuous delivery of valuable products. Beyond that, an incremental deliverable that is functional and provides value is the primary measure of progress. Agile life cycles combine both iterative and incremental approaches in order to adapt to high degrees of change and deliver project value just a little bit sooner or more often. On the other end of the spectrum now, let's take a look at the sequential life cycles. Sequential life cycles expect to take advantage of very high degrees of certainty around consistent requirements and a stable team that can become familiar with the process and workflow, and very low levels of risk or change that could totally hamper the process. And as a result, project activities often get executed in a serial or gated manner. In other words, one task must be completed before moving on to the next task, and then the next, and so on. In order to achieve this approach, the team really requires detailed plans to know what to deliver and how. And these projects succeed when other potential challenges are restricted, like requirements changes, project team members changing what the team delivers. Those things really hamper a sequential process. And team leaders aim to minimize change for the sequential project. When the team creates detailed requirements and plans at the beginning of a project, they can really articulate those constraints quite well. The team can then use those constraints to manage risk and cost. As the team progresses through the detailed plan, they monitor and control changes that might affect the scope, schedule, or the budget. By emphasizing a departmentally efficient and serialized sequence of work, sequential projects do not typically deliver business value until the end of the project. If the sequential project encounters changes or disagreements with the requirements, or if the technological solution is no longer straightforward, the sequential project will incur unanticipated costs, to say the least. All right, now taking a look at hybrid life cycles, where we take a slight turn and start merging both agile and sequential methodologies together. We're going to take a look at this section with an example. If a pharmaceutical company had a time-consuming USDA or FDA approval process tagged onto the end of its development process, and its entire life cycle looked like a project flow you see here, where an agile development life cycle is followed by a sequential rollout, this would be really common. While project teams undertook drug trials in an agile fashion, they had to present the drugs to an external group to perform the FDA approval process. And then a consultant helped to integrate the FDA approval process into the agile development process to create a more streamlined hybrid approach. The short version of the story here is that because FDA approvals are required to be completed at the end of the development process or repeated after any change, including even the most minor change, the process had to remain at the end as a separate phase. However, the consultant created some useful quick start guides and testing protocols that shortened the final FDA approval process. It's not always necessary to use a single approach for an entire project. Projects often combine elements of different life cycles in order to achieve certain goals. So really, any combination of agile, sequential, and/or process-based approaches is a hybrid approach. The pharmaceutical company example I gave really depicts the basic, pure approaches to project types that combine to form a hybrid lifecycle model. The early processes utilize an agile development lifecycle, which is then followed by a sequential rollout phase. And this approach can be used when there's uncertainty or complexity and risk in the development portion of the project that would benefit from a more agile approach, followed by a defined, repeatable rollout phase that is appropriate to undertake in a sequential way, perhaps even by a different team. So an example of this approach is the development of a new high-tech product, followed by a rollout and training of thousands of users. So just a quick recap here. How do you know when it is best to use a specific life cycle? Projects come in many shapes, and there are a variety of ways to undertake them. Project teams need awareness of the characteristics and options available to select the approach most likely to be successful for the situation. Agile life cycles are an approach that is both iterative and incremental to refine work items and deliver frequently. Sequential life cycles are a more traditional approach with the bulk of the planning occurring up front, then executing in a single pass in a more gated process. And then hybrid is an approach that combines elements of different life cycles like sequential, process-based, change management, and/or agile to leverage the benefits of each approach for different aspects or phases of the project. And this flexibility allows teams to adapt their methodology based on specific project needs, constraints, and sometimes even organizational requirements. Woo! Wonderful. We covered a lot of ground today. Again, we'll keep looking at these, and you'll get plenty of practice with the 3 of these life cycles in a future module. So if you're still feeling a little bit fuzzy, don't worry too much. But of course, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to your course instructor for guidance. Don't forget to check Canvas and do the lab directly after this lecture. Be sure to complete that by the due date scheduled in Canvas. And remember, no late works accepted in the class, so be sure to get those turned in. You should be able to get those done in about an hour or so just get it knocked out. You'll be in great shape. In our next lecture, which will be the last lecture for Module 2, we'll go over team collaboration and what it really means to collaborate on projects, but hopefully in a way that feels more effective than perhaps some of your previous attempts, because collaboration and teamwork are really what make projects successful. And I'm not just saying that to be cheesy. So we'll see you again for the next lecture.